Welcome to the Writer Groupie Podcast. I'm Kim Smith, the writing guru, bringing you discussions, insights, and insider details on planning, producing, promoting, and profiting as a writer. This is a podcast by writers for writers. You can find out more about Writer Groupie at www.writergroupie.net. And here's the next episode of Writer Groupie. Tonight I'm talking to Stephen H. Vincent. Stephen is the author of When Faith Lights the Way, the quest to restore electricity to a war-ravaged African hospital. Steve, welcome to the show. It's been great reading your book. To me, it was really fascinating. Did you intend to write a memoir? Because it kind of reads like a memoir.
Well, what started me on this long journey was I would tell people about the experience we had in Africa on our first project, and people were so fascinated and would come up to me after the presentations and say, "You need to write a book." And they kept doing that, and I thought, well, they probably know better than I do. I'm not really a writer, but I'll go ahead and give it a try. So 3 years later, I was able to get it accomplished.
Well, you did a fabulous job. I was riveted. How in the world? I mean, it's almost like a mystery because it starts out with you didn't even have a clue how you were going to do it. You didn't know how the men were going to come together for the job or anything of that nature. And it was fascinating to read how you got it all together and got it done. Well, just tell us a little bit about you. Let me back up because I get excited about books. I'm the writer groupie here. You know what I'm saying? So tell us about you. Tell us how you got involved in this story and this writing of this book.
Well, it goes back, of course. I was born in Dallas, Texas. My father was working for a company called Texas Power and Light, which they supplied electricity in a lot of North and East Texas. Went to school in Dallas, attended a small Methodist church there, was involved in the activities, and then went to Texas A&M, got an engineering degree, and from there went to work talking to utilities and selling them the equipment that they use to build their lines. One of the things I used to do was go to smaller utilities and say, if you'll buy all this material from me, I'll help you put it in. And so that way I learned how to do it myself. And that was a little bit of foreshadowing for being able to do this type of project in Liberia. I met my wife, had no interest at all in travel. I hadn't even been on an airplane till I graduated from college and flew to Pennsylvania. I ended up meeting my wife. She was a travelholic. She booked a trip to London for us right after we got married. And I was very disappointed because I saw no reason to travel. Of course, I went to London. I was totally fascinated by, all the Roman ruins and all the history that was there. So we decided to do some traveling, and then she pushed me again, and she signed me up for a mission trip to Haiti. This was about 6 months before our first daughter was born. Goodness, I had no desire to go into that type of atmosphere, but boy, I was just so fascinated after being there that these people, I expected I was going to teach them so many things and change their life. And what I found was they knew things that I didn't know. And so we helped each other and worked together. So this was always in the back of my mind about how can I truly help people? Mm-hmm. So I was just so fortunate. This company that I work for really just expanded greatly. We were working North Texas, and then in about 2006, we had gotten into about 13, 14 states with about 16 different locations. And at that point, we all felt like it was time to sell the company. And so I already knew what I wanted to do at that point when we sold it. I did go through a transition with a new company and stayed there about 2 years. But I thought, I've got a skill that's really not very useful here in the U.S. because so many people know how to do it. But if I could go to some of these places like Haiti and share this knowledge about electricity, I just thought I could maybe help change a few lives. So then I mentioned this to my minister about I'd like to work in rural areas, in underdeveloped areas. He put me in contact with somebody named, he was the deputy director of UMCOR at the time. And I made a proposal to him to light a few small houses and villages. And he said, well, if you would be willing to light a hospital and electrify a hospital, we would really appreciate it.
Wow.
To be honest, I felt like, I was something a little special. I patted myself on the back. I accepted it without thinking. And then I realized it was about the size of Central Park in New York.
Holy cow.
Like 781 football fields.
Holy cow. Wow.
And it was 52 buildings.
Did he use the term little?
No, he never really did. He did not mislead me. Sam Dixon was a wonderful person. I let myself be carried down this path. But once I said yes, the strange thing was the team that decided to help with this, it never dawned on us how large this project was. We never felt uncomfortable about this. We had never shipped material overseas. It was just like, okay, here's the next thing we do. So, I'd like to say, of course, there's a story about someone that's caught in a storm and he sees his teacher across the water over there calling him to walk on the water. And he says, okay. And so he gets out of the boat and starts walking. And as long as he's focused on his teacher and what his teacher's trying to get him to do, he doesn't have any problem. But when he starts looking around and worrying about it, that's when the problems start. And I guess we kind of felt the same way. It was just another challenge. And okay, we were going to work on it.
Man, this book is a delight, you guys. Why don't you hold it up for us, Steve? It's called When Faith Lights the Way, The Quest to Restore Electricity to a War-Ravaged African Hospital. And it was in Liberia, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And what struck me the most about the story was when I was approached to do this podcast, and it said that the surgeons were completing operations with flashlights in their mouth. I was like, holy cow, this is a story.
Well, and that is just so foreign to anything we experience in the United States. Liberia went through a 14-year civil war. 250,000 people were killed. And before the war, it was considered Little America. It was one of the most developed countries in Africa.
Wow.
And they looked to the U.S. as their parent country. Mm-hmm. But after that civil war, they became arguably probably the most destitute country in the world. And yes, this hospital, 24,000 patients a year, 24,000 patients a year. Their electricity was so poor that the wires were strung on trees, and anytime a storm would blow through, and in the summer you have the tropical storms, it's not that far from the equator, the lines come down. And so you may be in an operating room having a child, maybe you've been in a car accident, but there's no air conditioning. There aren't any lights. So they raise the windows so that they don't pass out from heat exhaustion or have their patient pass out from heat exhaustion. They can't use anesthesia machines that are what we use today because they work off the cycles in electricity, the 60 cycles or the 50 cycles. So, you know, they finished operations with flashlights in their mouth, no anesthesia. We really didn't want to spend our time in that hospital or around it because it would deter us from what our mission was, and that was to get an electric system that worked. We were just glad we could help out.
Yeah, that's such a humanitarian effort on your and your comrades' parts to do that. Man, y'all, you got to get this book now. I'm not kidding. I read this book. This book is really, really good, and it is a tale beyond belief. It's an adventure story almost from the time it starts until it finishes. So, but we wanted to talk to you, Mr. Steve, about a few things that have to do with writing. And that includes things like, when you were writing this book, did you find a specific writing style that appealed to you? Did you find that you needed to write in silence, or maybe you could only write with music playing, or did you write in the dark? Did you write in a coffee shop? You know, tell us how you got this book written.
Well, I did it two different ways. The first thing I did was, as an engineer, and because of the distances and all our groups separated, I sent out a lot of emails. And so I reviewed all those emails. I've had several people comment, my gosh, how can you remember all this? There's so many details in this book. But I had some cheat sheets in that I had all my old emails, and I went through those. And so basically I read what I wanted to write before I started writing. I educated myself on my subject. And I was able to write in an office we had in our house. And then one of our favorite places, we have a house in Colorado, and I know there was a month we were up there in, I think it was February, and there was a lot of snow. And so I could sit in one of those rooms up there and just look out the window and see the snowfall and, you know, really organize in my mind what I wanted to say. So, you know, I'm a quiet writer.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Yeah, and that's a lot of people. I mean, I've heard more and more lately that people really like to listen to music while they're writing. And some people, well, I have done this also, is I'll put headphones on, but I'll be listening to white noise, you know, just like sea sounds, or, you know, just wind rustling sounds or something silly like that. And sometimes just even white noise, just a static kind of noise. For some reason, I think it helps me focus, but, you know, everybody's different. Everybody's got a different mode of operandi, as it were. And so I wanted to know what you did. Also, I would like to know if you have found any writing challenges during your journey with this book. Things like, you know, how did you sit down and get a writing sprint in every day?
Well, no, it really came in spurts. And I would almost call it inspirations. There would be times I would write over maybe 10 days or so. I might write 60 or 70 pages at one time. And then I would put it down for a while and come back to it. And not being an experienced writer, I had forgotten so much of what I had learned in school about writing. So that was difficult. If Word wasn't there and Grammarly wasn't there that I could refer to and help me, where somebody could even read it, that would have been a problem. So being inexperienced, I would write something, and I think you mentioned earlier about letting it rest and cook and come back after several days. I'd come back and read this and go, oh my gosh, this makes no sense whatsoever. I don't even know what I was talking about. And so you know, I was somewhat disorganized in that I would write in spurts, and then come back and read it and write that. And then maybe in the interim, I would write a different section. I was not terribly disciplined. And that may be one reason it took me 3 years to get through it all. If I had it to do over again, I would take the advice I've heard so many times is write. I had written a few articles for church magazines and church newspapers, but there's nothing like, just like a football player or a basketball player, just really practicing.
Yes.
Practice.
That's true. It's like a muscle. The more you use it, the better you get with using it.
Yes.
Well, and sometimes, we all have to start somewhere, but it's like they say, you can't edit an unwritten page. If you don't have anything on the page, you have nothing to edit. So at least, even though you did it in spurts, as you said, you had something there to work with or work from for your next day's batch of writing. And I've written linearly just about every book that I've written, but the book we were talking about before we started the podcast, that one I've learned in the last few books, you can write in spurts. You can write a chapter here and a chapter there and pick up something in the middle and write it for a while and go to the end and write it for a while. You don't have to write it linearly, but for some reason that was just in my head. I guess I tried to write like I read. You start in the front and you work your way to the back. But sometimes a story won't come to you that way. So it might have been beneficial to you that you wrote it the way you did.
Well, it did work out. I think if I was doing another book, I would probably at least put down an outline of the stories and the chapters. But just at the time, it was just coming to me, this section, and I just wrote those and almost put it together chronologically at times.
Well, you know what? It turned out real well, I'll just tell you.
Thank you. A lot of help.
Has writing this book made you or encouraged you to consider doing another book of any kind? Maybe like I was giving you an example earlier of, some people start out writing about the history of, say, an island somewhere that they visit on vacation, and they like it so much they decide, well, I'm going to be a travel writer. I'll go to these exotic places and I'll just write stories about the places where I go. And there is nothing wrong with that. It's very lucrative, I understand. But I was wondering, because traveling to a foreign country such as you did, maybe you thought about something like that.
Well, and I'm just in the beginning stages of this, but in visiting these other countries, I really have developed opinions. For example, I feel like most Americans live in a bubble. So many of them don't travel outside their state. Very few of them travel outside the United States. And even more, or even less, travel to areas about people that we could help. And so I constantly hear people's opinions about how this help needs to be done or how we can help do this. And it's like, no, you really don't understand what they're looking for, what they need. These people would like to be able to live with their family and friends, to become self-reliant and self-sufficient. Don't wait till they get to this country to help somebody. Go there and help them develop their own area. And so, I guess I sort of have a desire to explain to people my thoughts on what's important, how you can get a good bang for your buck, either in the United States, with elections coming up, or going to other countries. That how do you really help people? That's just a passion of mine. What is truly a help and what is truly a hindrance?
Maybe a book on how to get the most out of a mission trip.
Could be. Could be.
That sounds like a good book. That sounds like something a lot of people might be interested in. Do you know that I have never taken a mission trip? Never in my whole life have I taken a mission trip, but I have wanted to many times, especially when they were talking about where they were going. You know how your minister would tell the congregation about, okay, our next mission trip is XYZ and we're going here and there and whatever. And I always sit in the, in the pew thinking, well, I think I'd like to go to that, but no, didn't ever do it. Didn't, and I don't know whether it was a lack of motivation or lack of money or both, but there you go. But that would be what I would be interested in.
You've touched on what the main purpose the reason I wrote this book. And that's, I feel like everybody has this little voice that whispers in their ear, you should go do this. This would really be something that would change your life. And we were just ordinary people. My goodness, most of this group of 9 that went with us, most had never been out of the state of Texas. Only 2 of us had traveled to other countries, and one of those was to Vietnam during the Vietnam War.
Oh my.
So that was not a pleasure trip.
No, it was not.
All these people, just when the call came, they answered that voice and said, I'm going to do that. And I'm hoping that people that read this book will think, you know what, I have that little voice too, and I've always wanted to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to try it and see what happens. And goodness, yes, we have construction people, we have engineers, we have attorneys, we've had doctors, we've had secretaries, nurses, we've had people that can put in a whole electric system and design it, or people that can't screw in a light bulb. And so, I really wrote this book to encourage people that you don't have to have the experience. You have to have the will to make that first step, to step out of your boat.
Mm-hmm. And make a difference.
That's right.
Yes. Listen, I am so thoroughly excited for you about your book. I just think it's going to do great things. I really hope it does. And if there's certainly anything that myself or this podcast can do to help you, I'll be glad to. And if you decide to write a follow-up, or if you decide to write another book, I want for you to come back on the show, because chatting has just been a simple delight. Before we get off, though, I do want to ask you to give an aspiring writer a piece of advice. Maybe it's something that you wish you had known before you embarked on this journey, or maybe it's something that you've picked up along the way that you think is really good advice that you need to share. But there's an aspiring writer out there who's saying, wow, maybe I do want to write that book, but I'm afraid of X.
Well, I think that goes back to the last conversation. If you have that voice in your head that says, I really would like to write a book, go ahead and write that book. Sit down and write, because when my voice tells me I need to go electrify a hospital in Africa, or go to Honduras to help with an orphanage, your little voice may be saying, you need to write a book. You need to write a book, a children's book that gives people pleasure. You may need to go help at the Salvation Army with Angel Tree. There are just so many things you can do, but that little voice inside your head, you just need to follow it. And if you get told write a book, sit down and take the time. Try various ways to do it, like you were talking about with white noise, or in a quiet room, or in a coffee shop. Experiment, but stay true to your purpose. Stay focused on that purpose. And if that's your calling and you're following it, good things will probably happen.
I agree. What great advice. That's such wisdom. I'm so glad to hear you say that. I also wanted to ask you if you have a website or a Facebook page, Twitter page, anything like that you'd like to share so that people can follow you and find out more about the book. You're welcome to advertise yourself right now.
Well, we do have a landing page. It's called whenfaithlightstheway.com. There is also a Facebook page that's Power from the Sun. That's SON, Power from the Sun. that talks quite a bit about the book lately, but it will also give you an update on where Power from the Sun is. And I don't guess I've explained that. Power from the Sun is the organization that we formed to do that hospital in Liberia. But we've done about 10 other projects in Honduras and Sierra Leone. We're looking at doing one in Kenya. And so Power from the SON on Facebook is a great place to find out about the book. It's also a great place to find about how you might help or just follow what we're doing. And you can get the book on Amazon.com. When Faith Lights the Way. Hold it up again.
Yeah, there you go. Is it also available in electronic book, an ebook, or audio form? It is? Okay, good.
Yes, okay, on Amazon.com, either the written book or the audio book, yes.
Okay. I will link all those different sites that you just mentioned in the blog post that accompanies this podcast/video. And I will update you, since I have your email now, with information on when it goes live. I'm hoping to get it up by this weekend. If not, I'll let you know when it goes live. Okay. It'll be pretty soon.
Okay.
So it has been fun talking to you, Steve. I really appreciate you coming on Writer Groupie, and I'm serious. You write another book, I want you to come back.
Well, I'd be glad to. One thing you mentioned, some help. Being a novice, I'm not very good at the marketing side. And if you can give me some hints on, I self-published on this, on how to market. I did PR by the book. But I know I need to probably do some things too. I've talked to Sunday school classes and in church, but how else do you get the word out? And I want to get the word out so people will be inspired, possibly.
Well, let me tell you, you started real well. Podcasts are really hot right now. A lot of people don't have time to read a whole book. They don't have time to read a newspaper. So they go online for their information and they read electronic books. They have audio books that they listen to in their car or on their journey to wherever. So with all the technology that we have available, you have to really try and provide the information to your consumer in the way that they like to get it. That's why I will offer video, audio, and written. That way, somebody that has time to read will read the blog post. Somebody who doesn't have time to read will listen to the podcast. And those who like video on YouTube, they're going to get it that way. But sometimes you just have to kind of, okay, this is going to be your word. Step out of the box, step out of the boat, and try something different. So if you have that little voice that says you'd like to podcast, you do that, because podcasting is very, very hot right now. And I think you'd be a good podcaster. You have a great voice and you have good stories to tell.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Well, listen, I'm going to end our recording here, but you stick by. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Infinity Author Services for your author services needs. We create professionally designed book covers as well as provide editing, promotions, update your social media accounts, and WordPress site. Let Infinity Author Services increase the exposure of your novels with our exciting promo packages. You can find out more at infinityauthors.com. Infinity Author Services for the indie author in you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Writer Groupie. For booking information, show notes, and more, visit writergroupie.net.